Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the April 15th City Council regular meeting. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. All of those that would like to, any of those that would like to join the council, myself, in the Pledge of Allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda this evening is under special business. I'm going to be handing out 2 environmental awards tonight, the Ruth Kees Award and the Community Environmental Award. So I'm going to move over to the podium and invite the recipients up. Connie Marsh, come on up and join me. Well, 2 awards, 2 speeches. First speech for Connie. She's alone, making her stand up here all by herself. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight to hand out these 2 very special awards. These are meant to honor those who spend hours and weeks and months and years of their lifetime advocating for the environment in our community. So first tonight, I want to thank Connie Marsh for all of the work that she has done and present her with the Ruth Kees Award. This award is presented to those in the community who have shown extraordinary leadership to protect our amazing natural surroundings. Its namesake, Ruth Kees, lived on Tiger Mountain for many years, observing and studying the flow of water, the health of the salmon, and the damages that development could do to both if we were not very careful. And Ruth Kees was not a shy advocate. I met her in 1994 at the house she built on Tiger Mountain and learned all about the precious aquifer lying beneath this valley and how wonderfully interconnected our water resources are to each other. I also learned how passionate individuals in this community can be. Connie has been a stalwart environmental activist and community resource in Issaquah and has served as a key leader in the Issaquah Environmental Council since its existence. She has spent countless hours, more than most would invest, in reviewing and studying city and state land use policies, and she has served on many city committees and advisory groups. Connie has devoted countless hours attending city council meetings, committee meetings, and board and commission meetings to advocate for land, our forests, and our water. I first heard Connie in the early 90s when I served on the city's development commission. But it's not just all advocacy work. You can also see Connie out in the community volunteering in a physical role, removing those nasty invasive species in town and nurturing native ones that grow throughout our community. So thank you, Connie, for your decades of service. And I have a little word for you. So Connie's going to stay up with me, and we're going to bring up Save Cougar Mountain. Get over here. Get over here. The second award I'm giving out tonight is to the Save Cougar Mountain group, and I know we have more than 2 of them here. Come on. Come in. We don't bite. Sometimes we don't bite. Yeah, I see a couple of green shirts. Yeah. You can definitely bring up any of your crew that you want.
Come on.
So,
come on.
They've got the shirts on.
Tim.
No. So this is another environmental award that we give out that builds upon the legacy of the Ruth Kees Award. Issaquah also has this Community Environmental Award, and it recognizes outstanding achievements by individuals, groups, and organizations. This year, we're honoring Save Cougar Mountain for its grassroots efforts to preserve land previously proposed for development. Working together, this group organized and led a broad public effort involving more than 2,500 supporters over 2 years who advocated to preserve 46 acres on Cougar Mountain. Commonly called Bergsma, the land located on the northeast corner of Cougar Mountain between Newport Way and Northwest and Talus had been proposed for development, most recently at 57 homes. It's one of the last significant pieces of privately owned land, open space, zoned for development in Issaquah. From circulating petitions to attending city council meetings, this dedicated group of community members invested an impressive amount of time rallying support among neighborhoods, park and open space advocates and agencies. And in late 2018, the Issaquah City Council approved a preservation plan for the open space. Just recently, the city of Issaquah even received a monetary donation of $3,000 from Save Cougar Mountain towards our purchase of the property. Thank you to all of Save Cougar Mountain's volunteers for your dedication to open space preservation and our community. We're so proud of you all. And I have a token of our appreciation.
We'll take it.
So take it. Thank you very much. Stay up for just a little bit longer. I'd also like you to join me here as I do our proclamation for Earth Day. So please stay up here with me. It would be an honor for me to stand here with you and read this. Whereas the global community, now more than ever, faces extraordinary challenges such as climate change, global health issues, and environmental degradation, food and water shortages, and economic struggles, and whereas Earth Day offers residents of all ages a unique opportunity to make a personal commitment to practices that are vital in protecting the quality of human and other life in Issaquah for generations to come. And whereas the city of Issaquah is celebrating Arbor Day at Sammamish Cove on April 20th, please join me, and in the Downtown Issaquah Association is holding its annual city downtown spring cleanup in honor of Earth Day on April 20th, and whereas the city of Issaquah prioritizes sustainable practices and recognizes the outstanding environmental achievements by individuals, groups, and organizations within the community, now therefore I, Mary Lou Pauley, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim April 22nd, 2019 to be Earth Day in the city of Issaquah, and urge all residents to celebrate this special observance and further to pledge to take action together so that we can contribute to a healthy environment and make Issaquah an even greater place to live, work, play, learn, and visit. So. So normally the next item on the agenda is also under special business, but I wanted to take a 5-minute break right now so that I could get some pictures with these folks and their awards. So we are going to take a 5-minute break. And we're going to take our pictures like right in front of where you guys are.
So we need to move.
Okay, we'll move.
Let's go hang out in the break room.
It's good to be the chair.
Do you want us down here or do you want us higher up? I think right in front of here. Yeah. You got your shirt on. Thank you, Council.
That's fine.
You're fine.
I just set my internal metronome to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Council, for allowing their little small recess and the picture taking. That was fun. We've had, I know it's not that obvious, the folks on camera, but we had 20 or 30 folks here to celebrate these 2 awards with us tonight, and I appreciate you for doing that. The next item on business this evening is ID 0460, Newport Way, State Route 900 to Southeast 54th Street, Value Engineering Update. Council will be hearing a presentation this evening. This item was last before Council for formal action in December 2017, when the initial Newport Way corridor concept was approved. Tonight, staff will be providing an update on the value engineering study that was conducted on this project. I'd like to ask Transportation Manager Kurt Seaman to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Polly, Council. We're Kurt Seaman, Transportation Manager here at the city. We're very happy to be here tonight to give you a progress update on our Newport Way from SR 900 to 54th update. We've done some work since we last spoke, and we wanted to share that with you before we go out to a community meeting here that we're planning for later this spring. I think early June is what we're looking at now. So, with that being said, I have a short presentation to walk you through what we've done since we last spoke. So I want to review our progress. I want to share the results briefly of our value engineering study that we did, talk a little bit about that, discuss what the implications of that study have been to the design, and then answer any questions that you have. We conducted a value engineering study in December of last year, in December of 2018. And for those of you that may not know, value engineering is, it's related to cost savings, but it's not just cost savings, it's how to provide better value to the project. So that often translates into savings and costs, but that's not the only purpose of the study. And then I want to talk about specifically what that value engineering study, how that impacted the roadway cross-section. So just a short recap of where we've been on this project. In December of 2017, we shared the preferred corridor concept with you, and you approved that corridor concept. That was the result of a lot of work, and I'll show you a slide that demonstrates how much we've actually worked on that project with the community. I feel like it's been a good process, and we want to continue working with the community as we move forward on this. So in the last year, in 2018, from January to December, we worked hard to get from the 30% design, which we shared with you, to approximately a 60% design, which is typically the level of design that is required to do a meaningful value engineering study. A lot of the work we did last year, besides advancing the overall plans, was looking at culverts, stormwater, utility design, and those kinds of things. As we were working on this project, as you're aware, the costs continue to escalate, and there were also changes to this corridor, both with what was happening along Cougar Mountain with the Bergsma property and the transition of that to parkland. And so it made sense to do a value engineering study at that time. So we undertook that in December to look at what opportunities there would be to as I said, improve the value of the project and presumably have some cost reductions. So since that work on the value engineering in December 18 and January of 19, we've evaluated that study and wanted to share with you the key results of that impact this project specifically. So a little history again. So just to recall, this was the cross-section that we shared with you back at the end of 2017, and this was the cross-section that we developed by closely working with the community. And it has so this is the Cougar Mountain side over here on the left side of the screen, and then there's a sidewalk, a landscape buffer, a bike lane, 2 travel lanes. In some portions of this roadway, there's actually a center lane that's either a median or a turn lane, but in the Cougar Mountain section, it's typically 2 lanes. And then same thing on the other side, bike lane, landscape buffer, and then on the, it's nominally the north side, the I-90 side of the project, there is a 10 to 12 foot mixed-use trail that can be used both by cyclists and walkers. So this was the concept that we landed on. This is, again, one that was the result of a large community effort, and it vastly improves pedestrian and bicycle facilities along this corridor, better access to the neighborhoods. It's a design that accommodates future traffic demands, and one that I think we all agree ultimately enhances and supports the character of that portion of our community. So I know you can't see this, and you really don't need to. You can probably see it on your screens. I think the audience probably can't. But the point of this slide and the following one is to show you that we had all those rectangles up there represent either touches that this project had with council, either full council or in the infrastructure committee, and then the blue squares up on top here were all, can't see it, but they're all design workshops and then open houses and then public meetings, and then interspersed with coming back to council in a variety of ways. And as we moved through the project, we ended up with this, like I said, in December of 2017, bringing this to council for your approval of the preferred concept. And at that time, we were very clear and were very committed to this purple box, which I hope you can see, which is this idea of ongoing communication and updating the community and the council on design progress and schedule. So that's what we're doing tonight. We're taking the first step on that with you to update you on our progress and results of the VE study. And like I said, plan to shortly after this presentation go to the council and share the results, the community, and share the results a little more detail with the community. So here are without making you wait anymore to see what I'm talking about with a value engineering study. This was, so they looked at a lot of different things along the corridor, and we're just going to talk about what are really the most impactful, the sort of the biggest, made the most difference to the corridor and made the most difference to impacts and also to costs. And their idea here, if you can see this very well, but this portion, as you recall, along the Bergsma, now park property, has a very steep mountainside, hillside coming right down to the edge of Newport. And as soon as you widen out this Newport to build these bike facilities and landscape strip and sidewalks, you're pushing into this hillside, so you're cutting back a portion of the hillside with the trees, and you're also building walls, which, as you may recall, were in the highest parts were 20 feet or more. So that was a pretty significant impact to that side of Cougar Mountain. So when the value engineering folks, their change to the project that would improve the value, they said, well, you have this mixed-use trail on this side of the project that provides your non-motorized connectivity for people that don't want to ride their bikes on the street, and also for pedestrians. And so why not just remove both the landscape strip and the sidewalk from the Cougar Mountain side? So that was fine, except for it really didn't align with what we heard from the community as the initial project goals of improving pedestrian traffic along, or accommodating pedestrian traffic on both sides of the corridor. So we're not seeing that really meets what we heard from the community. So instead, we modified this value engineering recommendation to be our new roadway section, our preferred roadway section for this corridor, which not that different from the value engineering study, but it does maintain a 5 to 6 foot sidewalk on the Cougar Mountain side. So eliminates the landscape strip, which by eliminating the landscape strip gives us far less impact to Cougar Mountain, reduces these walls to about half the height nominally from what they were, and reduces the costs by many millions of dollars. We haven't done a detailed cost estimate, but it could be as in the order of $4 to $5 million in reduced savings from building a smaller wall. So sort of went through this already. The benefits of this road section, you know, we think this is a big deal to respond positively. There's such a strong feeling in this community of the importance of saving Cougar Mountain. And so this road, although it's a benefit for the Newport and for the community that lives along Newport, it comes at a cost to build the section that we had originally proposed and cuts into Cougar Mountain significantly and builds these higher walls. So this wall design that we've proposed, by maintaining a sidewalk along this side, lower walls, reduces the impact to Cougar Mountain from what we originally had, but still maintains all the connectivity that I talked about earlier. So, in summary, we shared the preferred concept with you. We initiated a value engineering study. We've considered those recommendations from the value engineering study, and we have incorporated those as appropriate to preserve the forested slope of the mountain while maintaining the pedestrian connectivity. Our next steps include working with the county to acquire the right-of-way to complete this part of the roadway section. We also are planning to move to 90% design so that we can move to right-of-way acquisition, which we understand is of importance to the council. And as I mentioned a couple times, we are planning an open house to share all of this information with the community in June. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. It looks like the maximum height of the wall would be 11 feet. Will that be the case, or will it depend on conditions?
So the slope of that mountain is changing as you go down it. So the wall height is changing as you go down it. So the wall height varies. In some places, there's no wall along that corridor, and I think the maximum in this scenario that I'm presenting is on the order of 10 or 11 feet. As I mentioned, it was in the previous version, it was in excess of 20 feet. So it's, you know, that's, aside from the cost savings of that, just the impacts to that hillside, the constructability of it, just the sort of how that feels when you're going down the corridor to be adjacent to such a tall wall, those are all significant improvements that we see.
And one other question. In the previous design, there was the landscape strip and there was the lamp posts that were, it looks like, in that
Yes.
strip. So now they're going to be in the sidewalk. And so I
Right.
just wondered if that's going to allow wheelchair access, if it's still wide enough
Right,
that
so-
it's accessible.
So that's a great question. And so there's a couple of ways. Let's see if I can go back there real quick. That's a good eye you have there. So that's right here is what you're talking about, really. So it's this area here. And so previously, as you mentioned, the facilities like lamp posts, fire hydrants could be another example of that, would typically be in a landscape strip, and now they're shown here. I think I would take this to be schematic. There's ways we haven't gotten to 90% design of this corridor yet, so there's ways we can look at this design. It may be possible. Right now, we're showing a staggered lighting pattern by putting lights on both sides of the corridor. It may be possible to provide the same amount of lighting by putting lights only on one side of the corridor, in which case we could put street lights all on this side, for example. We haven't done that final lighting analysis. Same thing with the fire hydrants. We may be able to serve the fire hydrant needs for the whole street from this side. There's some sort of other ways to look at that. You can actually put sort of bulb out type things or bulb in type things into the wall, so you can build little indents into the wall, put your street lights or your fire hydrants in there as well. So there's some ways to do that that we just haven't quite figured out. They would not, to be clear, that wouldn't be a functional sidewalk to put the lamp post as we've shown it here on this diagram. So it's just, that's a great question, and so I can assure you that in final form, it won't look like we're showing it here.
Deputy Council President Batiste?
Thanks for the presentation. In regard to this picture, I just had a follow-up question on the wall height. And this picture versus the one right before it with the landscape strip.
Right.
Were you saying that the wall height there would, while it still needs to be determined, but they would be really equivalent? Those
So what
two?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What I'm saying here is, although it's a little hard to make a side-by-side comparison of these two pictures, but if you can imagine that in this picture, this curb line stays fixed. So the curb line's in the same spot on both of these drawings. And so it's the same curb line. So now that you're putting your wall much closer to the hillside, to the mountainside, it doesn't need to be nearly as tall when you're removing all this material here. You're cutting much farther back into the hillside. So as you cut farther back into the hillside, the wall height has to go up to match. So in our preferred alternative, which I'm sharing with you, in this original design, this height was as much as 20 feet or more. In what I'm showing you tonight, this drawing, the wall height, this same wall, although it looks sort of similar because we don't now have the planter strip there, that wall is about half as high. It's maybe on the order of 10, 12 feet, 10, 11, 12 feet, something like that. So that's significant. It's not just the height. Walls get harder to build as they get taller too. So you have more choices in construction methods when you have shorter walls than when you have big, tall walls. So there's a lot of benefits to this approach to the roadway.
Thanks for the clarification.
Council President Martz?
So, how much value has been engineered out? What's the before and after rough order magnitude cost on this project?
So the costs are somewhat changing, and the before cost for this entire project, I think the last numbers we shared were on the order of $50 million. Sheldon, does that sound about right? Yeah, it's somewhere in the order. So these particular improvements save, like I said, shave about $5 million off that price. So it still is, it's still a significant capital project, but $5 million is a significant amount of money to save.
10%. I just wanted to know the relative magnitude. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Kurt.
Okay, and
You're coming
we'll
back in June.
and we'll see the community. Some of you I recognize out there. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next item on the agenda is audience comments. Audience members may address the council at this time. The guidelines for public participation will be displayed on the screen. Tisha's just getting them up. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Those who signed up will be called forward first. If you did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. And if you are here as part of a group, please identify yourself as spokesperson for the group. And if you are in the audience this evening and you are supporting or in favor of the comments that you're hearing, please raise your hand so council understands the amount of support in the room. Tisha, has anyone signed up to speak this evening?
Yes, Larry Franks. First off, I'd like to thank the city and the council, and Emily in particular, for helping provide guidance last
Larry,
month.
you have to give us your name and address.
Oh, the name and the
I'm sorry.
address. I jumped right into the thank you. So my name is Larry Franks. I live at 24001 Southeast 103rd Street for the last 47 years, so I've seen some evolution in this wonderful city. So back to the thank you, we shared some information about changes that could be made that would help our fish survive making the journey from the Issaquah salmon hatchery out to the saltwater. So thank you very much for the letters to our legislators that hopefully they'll make appropriate decisions and we'll get more fish back. I wanted to share another strategy that is a personal one. I'm not representing the Friends of Issaquah Salmon Hatchery at this point. I need to get my board of directors on board on this particular issue first. But with a Bachelor's of Science in Fisheries from the UW in 1979, and pursuing this issue and pursuing the fish ever since then, I have a lot of data to support what's going on. You can't help seeing the news without knowing that our orcas are starving. There are noise pollution issues, there are chemical pollution issues, but the main issue is lack of prey. And the southern residents, for you do what your mom says as far as when they're raised and what you see for food, they're dependent on Chinook. Chinook salmon have been in very short supply in Puget Sound for 2 decades now. And Governor Inslee is very aware of this, put together a task force that identified 36 actions, and action is being taken on a number of them. The problem is most of those actions have results that are 3 or 4 years out. So what we did here, for instance, before in helping our smolt make it out to the saltwater, still mean that those go out to the Pacific, get large and come back, and so our orcas will have something to eat in 3 or 4 years. They're starving now. What can we do now? The answer to that is to stop Chinook harvest, period. Stop Chinook harvest. There have been several signature restaurants that have stopped selling Chinook. Puget Consumers Community, changed their name last year, only sells Alaska-sourced Chinook, and these are wonderful gestures. They're gestures. Last year, there were 40,000 Chinook harvested in Puget Sound alone. If we don't do something soon, these fish are going to starve. I proposed this to several individuals in the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they were astonished. And they said that it could not be done. And what they really mean by that, and won't say, is that they'd be torn limb from limb. The economic interests of each of the fishing communities, recreational, I'm one of those, although I've stopped fishing for Chinook and steelhead, the tribal interests and the commercial interests. So I'm back to that. We need to stop the Chinook harvest. So what can the city of Issaquah do? I don't have a plan for that yet, but I'll be back.
Thank you, Larry. Tisha, has anyone else signed up this evening?
Yes, Nina Milligan.
Any raising of hands? Anyone else who'd like to stop?
And there are a bunch of hands in the air. Thank you, Larry.
Good evening. I'm Nina Milligan. I work at 2550 Northeast Park Drive in Issaquah Highlands, and I am here to say thank you to Connie. I also want to say thank you to Save Cougar Mountain, because you guys have done an amazing thing. But thanking Connie is more personal for me. When I first moved to Issaquah Highlands, my husband and I met Connie within the first week of living here, and her dedication to the environment, we both said, wow, when we walked away from this little visit. And I also said to myself, this is Issaquah. This is why I moved here. And so I want to thank you, Connie. Not only that night did you impress me, but when I served on the Urban Village Development Commission, you were there every single meeting to keep us in line, to help us evaluate the reports, to give us context. And then again on the City Council, again, you provided your rich study of what we were deliberating. And I just can't say enough. Thank you, Connie. And I say that because it is Earth Day month, and I do work in Issaquah Highlands. Issaquah should be proud that they have a fully built green community on the hill that is dedicated to living green. In fact, we have a trademark that was trademarked by our master developer in 2004, Living Green, and we use the words all the time. This month's Connections News, which has been out for a couple months now, is the Living Green issue. And every month we try to have a Living Green story in Connections News. This time it's the feature story, and it was done by a volunteer resident, an eco artist named Aline Block. And not only has she contributed thoughtful content to this issue of the paper, but she set up a series of eco events, and they'll be starting in May. You can find out about them in this issue of the paper, or you can look at IssaquahHighlands.com calendar. But it's been a great joy to work with her on that. And so to have this night come up where we're celebrating that environmental dedication in Issaquah, I'm overwhelmed with joy and pride being part of this community, especially to you, Connie, also to the Save the Cougar Mountain. Thank you for all the work you guys do. You do way more than anybody else, and I just want to take that extra time to say that. So thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Daphne Gann.
Hello, I'm Daphne Gann, and I live in Providence Point. And every once in a while, we come to talk with you. Now, as you may remember, the people from Providence Point worked very closely with City Council trying to pass a bond issue. And unfortunately, it failed, but we really appreciated all this that City Council did, and we are taking them at their word that they are going to find a way to fund this traffic light after the first of the year. And amazingly, all of a sudden, little utility markers flags showed up, and they came in, they did environmental tests, and everybody got really excited, and I thank you for that, because we now are hopeful. However, you're having a meeting tomorrow night, and there's no citizens' comment section to that meeting, so you got me tonight. This is a meeting that has, it's a joint meeting with some committee. It's a committee of volunteers. And it has a strange euphemism name, but it appears to function as a traffic advisory committee. And as you also know, I spend a lot of time watching City Council on TV, and I look at your website up and down, and this is the best way I could come up with to let you know that I have concern about this Traffic Advisory Committee. The Traffic Advisory Committee, and I'm using that term, but that's not what you call it. You called it something else on the television. They seem to be obsessed with bicycles and pedestrian paths, which of course, I mean, I've got kids who are doing the STP. I've had one kid who hiked the Cascade Trail for 3,000 miles last summer. My family did all this in the past, so I'm really sympathetic to bicyclists and pedestrians. But you know, on your website, you have a list of projects. And this list of projects, they're transportation or development projects or something. And I have a lot of extra time because my husband is sick. So I spent a lot of time looking at your website, and lo and behold, you have Project A funded, recommended. And when I get down to the 43rd Street traffic light, I see postponed. Now, I'm getting 2 points of view from the city. One, you're out there putting out flags to locate utilities, and yet you've got a committee that you're going to meet with tomorrow and no citizen comment. So again, here I am. You know, I thank you all for everything you've done, and I'm going to thank you again for at least telling that committee that there are safety issues that are equally as important as bicyclists and pedestrians, as much as I love them. And I do hope that I'll be watching on TV, and, you know, you can wave at me. And I thank you again, and for I'm sure, your wise counsel. You know, I've been on a lot of volunteer boards in my long life, and I will tell you, it is a thankless job sometimes. And I've talked to a lot of city councils from Anacortes to Tacoma, and I know you also have a hard job because you have all these people like me coming and whining at you. So again, thank you so much for what you do, and I'm hoping, you know, because I'm on a committee at Providence Point, I get harassed by all these old ladies who want answers. And I'll tell you, what I'm telling them is that we're still waiting to hear from City Council. So, you know, if I wrote on this piece of paper my phone number, if somebody wants to call me and give me a clue as to when you will let us know, I would appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. And some hands up in the air. I'm going to add a few little pieces of information. I think what Daphne's referring to is a joint meeting of the new Citizens Transportation Advisory Board and the City Council, which happened last week, so it should be available on YouTube, I'm guessing. And the council is scheduled to look at the unfunded project list in May. So Daphne will definitely give you a call and give you any other of the rest of the information that you need. Thank you.
Want me to have 1,000 old gray-haired people with canes there to...
No, I think we're good, but thank you for offering. Is there anyone else signed up on the list tonight?
No.
Is there anyone else who would like to come up and address council? I see two, Mr. Kapler and then Mr. Werner. He's deferring. Joe Werner.
My name is Joe Werner. The address is 1230 Oakwood Place, Northwest, in Issaquah. It's in the Summerhill subdivision. The exit off of Newport Way Northwest to our subdivision is Oak Crest. If you've ever walked it or rode a bike or drove by it, that's where they're building the Riva project, right at our intersection. That's not why I'm here to talk. I have some questions about Kurt's presentation. And where is Kurt? I don't have a problem with it, but I do have some questions. If I don't get answers tonight, I'm sure you will follow up with me. My wife and I were two of several dozens of Newport Way residents that participated in those planning meetings in 2017. What I think I heard tonight is an opt-out, not a cop-out, an opt-out of some of the things that were planned and designed into those original design concepts. And if I remember correctly, the retaining wall that you may have been talking about, Kurt, was probably the retaining wall that the Bergsma project would have built as a give on their mitigation fees.
Joe, we're going to get you the answers to your questions, but I want you to make sure you're addressing council this evening. We'll definitely get you your answers.
All right. So question number one is, where approximately do you believe that wall will begin near what used to be the Bergsma project area, and where will it end as you go west up Newport towards the King County Trailhead Park? Secondly, will there be retainer walls elsewhere on Newport Way? And I'm thinking particularly west of our intersection at Oakcrest, going towards Spyglass condos, and a sidewalk. Now, my understanding is that the Riva project is going to construct a 5 or 6 foot high boulder retaining wall, and that it is classified as temporary until the street widens, but there's no answer as to what's going to happen after that. So those are questions that I have regarding the retaining walls.
Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
David Kepler?
Good evening, David Kepler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. Ruth Kees. I'd get home and my wife would say, Ruth Kees called, or I'd get the message on the phone. This was before the cell phone. And it was basically marching orders. Now, I get the same thing from Connie, except it's on my cell phone, and I don't dare not answer it. But anyway, big step forward, $4 or $5 million possibly saved on Newport Way to maybe use at Providence Point. I think it can do a lot better. We really don't need a sidewalk on the base of the former Bergsma property, except at the 900 end, the more south end, where we will have a trail going up. There's a whole section in the most of the frontage on the Bergsma property on Newport is too steep. We don't want people going up the hill onto there. That's not where the trails are going to be. We'd love to keep those forests there and not really attract people to that area. The main access you have from the north to the Bergsma property is a great trail that starts on King County land. You don't want people, you don't need to have people, you don't really want them walking on Newport until they get to the new city property and then having to go up a super steep slope. You got a great trail that accesses off the county property. We need a chunk of sidewalk somewhere on the south between where the trail will start up, which hasn't been figured out, and 900. And you need a piece of sidewalk on the county property between the Summer Hill, basically Summer Hill, and the entrance to the county park. You don't need anything in that intermittent area with retaining walls, maybe some, but very little. But certainly you don't need that sidewalk there. If you got a little extra feet, make that sidewalk on the Tibbetts Creek side a little wider, or see what you can do to maybe have some viewpoints built into that or something like that, because the creek is really cool down below there, and you'll still look across the street up at a nice forest instead of a bunch of concrete. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Hands up in the air, and Mary's coming up.
My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive. And I just represent myself and also a lot of people that have attended the Newport Way corridor meetings. But I first want to talk about Ruth Kees. I first met Ruth Kees over at the Save the Airport, or Skyport, when I first moved here. And that's where I also met Harvey Manning. And then later on, David and Connie, and then Barbara, and all with the Issaquah Environmental Council. And they mean a lot to me because they've also educated me. They're the ones that told me and taught me how the city government works. works, and when I have a question, they're normally the ones I call first, because until even now, trying to find your way through the city website is not that easy. And I'd just like to say, for those of you who are listening tonight, if you're on Nextdoor, Connie, it's now probably 15, 20 years old, but she updates it every year, has a primer on how to maneuver through the Issaquah city government. And it's in the document section there, and it is really good for people who are wanting to know how things run in this Issaquah City. And she puts that together, and I'd really recommend that. I want to just, going forward, though, thank Connie for all the things that she's done for me and with the community and Help to Save. She's also, with the Central Area Plan, was one of the ones in getting that to be redone. And without her encouragement there and her continued dogging it, I don't think that would have happened. So thank her there. I want to support what David said as far as, the sidewalks. We need sidewalks on the south side where we have the housing developments. I also will be back talking to you again about the need to have, where we have turning in and out of the developments, we need to have center refuge islands for 3-lane roads. And we do not have that designed in right now. And it's going to be built, Oakcrest is going to be built without one. But from the trailhead to the city, we don't need a sidewalk on that side if we have a safe place to cross where we ask it to be as part of the plan, and that's at the trailhead. The King County trailhead is have a center median that people can cross to the other side. Then go down, not have a crosswalk at Oakcrest, but go on down and have a safe crosswalk there with the center refuge island, and do that all the way down Newport Way to Lakemont, and that's where we should be planning it. And can you hear me? Okay. And I would like to see that, and that's a major savings that I think, and I really would hope that we get adequate notice on this. This was really kind of a shock for me to see the city council, that this was coming before the council without any notice to us that have been attending those meetings. And to see this for the first time was a little bit, I guess, disturbing in the process. And I routinely check the Northwest Corridor Plan on the website, and there was nothing there about this. So had I not just happened to tap the agenda tonight, I wouldn't even known that this is a possibility. And I don't know how much notice we're going to get for the meetings, but hopefully that the website is updated so citizens have a chance to give their input before a community meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Is there anyone else who would like to address council this evening? I see Connie coming up.
So I'm Connie Marsh. I live on Squawk. It's good to see that the engineering department is looking at narrowing the footprint of the road in order to reduce the impacts to the Bergsma property. At this particular spot, there's also a wetland on the other side of the road, and so I'm not sure that what the impacts to all of the other critical areas are along this road, because it has never been clear on those plans. So it would be nice to have all of those impacts shown more clearly at these public meetings that they are having. You're still looking at a 10 to 12 foot multi-purpose lane and a wide landscape strip on the north side. So you do have a little more wiggle room with the width of the road. I noticed that Kurt did not say how tall the retaining wall would be without the sidewalk on that side. He just said the bookends, not what was recommended in the value engineering. So those are things I would like to know, but good, I'm glad for that. Now, the Save Cougar people, they're sort of humble. Whoop. But it's okay. Good. Wow. Dave and I have done this so many times over and over for what, the last 25 years. People have an idea, they want to do something, and so they come to people who might know, and then you try to provide information so they can do something successful. And the city is pretty complicated, and creating a campaign to get something achieved is inordinately time-consuming, and so they start, and you try to say, you know, I'm sorry, but this is likely to suck 2 years out of your life, and they never believe you. But there has been no one like this group that threw themselves into this and listened and yelled at me over and over, and did it, and did it, and did it, and did it, and did everything. And it was absolutely brilliant. And so I cannot tell you how awesome it was to watch a community come together at the right time with the right leadership and get something like Bergsma done. And it gives you hope for the future, where we can have a community who embraces who we are, including the environment, and we all work together, the city council, the administration, and the community voices, to all aim generally in the same direction for once, instead of trying to tear each other apart. And so this one is sort of a shining jewel example of what we could be and do on so many topics. And you know, it's not often I'm positive and hopeful, right? So what do you do with this? I think you try to do it again, and you try to make it easier for everyone to come together to have such enormous successes. So I appreciate, and I'm going to wave because I have to be talking to you. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Is there anyone, oh, lots of hands in the air. Is there anyone else who would like to address their council this evening? Second time. Anyone wishing to address their council? And third and final call. So we will close audience comments for tonight and move to committee and regional reports. Councilmember Walsh.
No report at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Land and Shore met on April 4th, and the first item was AB 7725, amending IMC 18.06 to prohibit new duplexes or cluster development in single-family suburban SF-S zoning district. This was going to be the first of two touches on this topic, and we, in fact, did not take action, and we did not make a recommendation. We did discuss the proposal, and we wanted a different option that was more looking at what the needs of the Sycamore neighborhood was, and potential work by the administration to give us other options that might be more targeted. So that will be coming back to Land and Shore on May 2nd for a second touch. The second item on our agenda was AB 7683, amendments to IMC 18.07.480, community facilities standards regarding public buildings. The committee had some questions from the last time we saw this item, such as why there was a max floor area ratio. And these questions were addressed to the committee's satisfaction, and the committee recommended approval unanimously, and this is on the consent agenda for this evening. And the third item was project updates. And as part of this, we were joined by the chairperson of the River and Streams Board, Jeff Wood. And we heard an update about the work of this board. This is a board that was previously very active, and in the last several years has been much less active. And so we talked about their work for the next coming year, and about how their work might align with the strategic plan, particularly the goal area of environmental stewardship in the strategic plan. And we generally talked about the importance of this board and how we're looking forward to working with them in the future, and to have our decisions as council supported by their discussions. The next meeting of the Land and Shore Committee is currently scheduled for May 2nd. Then I have one other report. On April 10th, I attended the pre-pick meeting in Renton City Hall, and this was a presentation from Metro. And Metro discussed the mobility framework and regional planning, specifically about how they are looking to be more than known for only bus service, but also for other mobility ways to get around. And one of those things that they talked about as a sort of flagship was the Eastgate Park and Ride Ride 2. And this is a on-demand shuttle service that connects with buses to downtown Seattle, the University District, downtown Bellevue, and Issaquah. So that was an interesting presentation about the evolution of Metro. And then I also attended the PIC meeting, but as in my capacity as a King Conservation District Advisory Board member, to read a statement generally in support of the programming of the King Conservation District from the perspective of a Sound Cities Association representative that serves on that advisory committee. And this concludes my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. The Services and Safety Committee did not meet in April, and the next meeting of Services and Safety will be on May 14th here in council chambers, and that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. The next meeting for the Council Infrastructure Committee, the April meeting, has been canceled.
Okay.
So there was information sent out about project status update. In May, our scheduled meeting is for May 16th, and there is not an agenda for that yet. Also want to report on the Growth Management Policy Board. We met on April 4th at the Seattle Puget Sound Regional Council headquarters. And we had a presentation from the Marysville Arlington Manufacturing Industrial Center, or MIC, application. We have a regional center. MICs are another type of center that's focused on preserving industrial lands, and it's about job production. And I think for our region, it was a very, if you would want to watch that presentation, this one in particular, the types of jobs and the affordability of housing in proximity of that MIC, I think really bodes really well for our four-county region. It's exactly the type of economic development and housing opportunities co-located, even though the plan is just for the industrial center, but the housing that's in proximity is much more affordable than other places in East King County. Most of our conversation in that meeting, we focused on the draft policies within the Vision 2050 update. These conversations about these draft policies are going to continue through June, when in July we expect the Vision 2050 draft plan to be available. So the GMPP will continue these conversations. We discussed proposed changes to the policies in the transportation chapter, the public services chapter. We ran out of time and didn't get to talk about the policy changes proposed in the economy chapter, and that's because we spent such a long time talking about the proposed policy changes in the development patterns chapter. And later this evening in this meeting, we're going to get to talk about Vision 2050 and this council's recommendation for to be sent in as part of the requested comments about the draft supplemental EIS. And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about the development chapters a little bit more during that meeting. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors met on April 11th. There were 3 items of note at that meeting. First of all, Captain Ben Lane was promoted to Deputy Chief, and he is a 28-year veteran of the fire service and starting with Fire District 10, so we want to congratulate him. The board approved returning some vehicles to the partner agencies because the vehicles have been replaced according to the schedule under the Vehicle Replacement Fund, the Vehicle Replacement Schedule, and one of those is a Ford truck that's being returned to Issaquah. And then the board also received a very, very high-level briefing on the final PFAS study summary report. This is a very complex topic, and the report is 384 pages long. The report is a result of more than a year of planning and coordination between Eastside Fire and Rescue, the City of Issaquah, and the Department of Ecology, State Department of Ecology. The Eastside Fire Board will receive more detailed information in June or July, and this council will receive more information, I believe, in June. That's my report. Or the board meets again on May 9th, and there's not an agenda set yet. That's my report.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Batiste?
Just a short announcement, the Eastside Human Services Forum meets this Thursday on April 18th in Bellevue, and no agenda as of yet. I'll report out this time I see everyone.
Thank you.
That's my report.
Thank you. Council President Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee met on Wednesday, April 10th. Couple issues of note. We approved supporting the Challenge Seattle Middle Income Housing Initiative with a letter that's very, very similar to the letter that the city of Issaquah had already signed on to. It passed something like 26-5 or 28-5, thereabouts. It was a strong majority, which is good because we needed a 2/3 majority to take a position on that. We had two items that generated a considerable amount of discussion and not exactly sure how they're going to turn out. One is Initiative 976, AKA the latest IMAN initiative. I would say that opinions in the room ranged from let's not get involved, it could do more harm than good, to cities who felt that it would have such substantial impact that it was worth SCA considering taking a position. There was also discussion of timing and whether taking a position would, what the timing would be like on that. But I think that SCA was going to go back, SCA Executive Board was going to go back and consider bringing that back, but it would be a two-touch system again. So it would be, we'd have it touched twice, and I would come back and talk to council about it before a final decision was made by PIC. The other was a conversation around the King Conservation District rate proposal that Councilmember Hunt spoke to. I think that there was a general sense of wanting to have additional information about what was going to go, what the new programs look like, and what people were going to get for the money. It's not a lot of money, but people are just, if I can editorialize, I think people are just being careful about rate increases for things and wanting to make sure that they have a strong and coherent conversation with the community when they go back and the public asks why this might be an increase substantially above the inflation rate. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Council President Martz. So now on to the mayor's report. Earlier this evening, there was an executive session at 5:30 that was held to discuss pending potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110, paren 1, paren I, and no action will be taken in this evening's open session. In addition to the Earth Day proclamation issued earlier this evening, on April 10th at a police department dispatch meeting, I proclaimed the week of April 14th through 20th to be National Public Safety Telecommunications Week, in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and citizens safe. I thought I'd pull out a few highlights from that proclamation. The safety of our police officers is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Issaquah Communication Center. And public safety telecommunications are the single vital link for our police officers by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them information, and ensuring their safety. And each dispatcher has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year. This coming Saturday, I'll also be issuing a proclamation at the Mountains of Sound Greenway Annual Arbor Day event. And I will be proclaiming April 20th, 2019 to be Arbor Day and urge all citizens to celebrate and support the efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. This holiday, called Arbor Day, was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world. And the city of Issaquah is an active Tree City USA designate for 26 years. The city of Issaquah will be celebrating its annual Arbor Day tree planting on Saturday, April 20th. And I hope you will join me and other city staff on this day at 10 a.m. at Sammamish Cove. And for more information, you can visit the Mountains to Sound Greenway website and view their events. It was mentioned earlier, but I just want to mention it one more time, that there was a donation received from Save Cougar Mountain. On April 5th, I and a few other council members were able to attend a community event hosted by the Save Cougar Mountain group, where they presented the city with a check for $3,000 to contribute towards the Bergsma property acquisition off Newport Way, just west of Legacy Landscaping on Cougar Mountain. I also want to express the city's gratitude to individual contributors who have also made donations in support of this land purchase. In the 2019 board and commission recruitment, we have completed the interviews for the city's boards and commissions, and I want to thank all the 43 applicants that responded as being interested in a seat. The applicant qualifications were very impressive. We are welcoming 20 new members and 17 returning members. All of our regular seats on our boards and commissions will be filled, and we may re-advertise to fill open alternate seats. And the last thing on my list this evening is Coffee with the Mayor. The next Coffee with the Mayor event will be on Wednesday, May 1st from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. in the library of the Senior Center. So I look forward to engaging with any community members who can join me for that day. And that concludes the Mayor's report. Proceeding to the consent calendar. The consent calendar was distributed to council in advance. If authorized, the items on the consent calendar will be considered together and approved under one motion. Have the payables and payroll been reviewed?
Yes.
Thank you. The clerk has asked me to announce that the April 8th work session minutes, which are on tonight's consent calendar, have been updated to include public comment provided at the meeting. The updated version was provided for you in hard copy this evening. Does any council member desire to remove any item from the consent calendar and consider it under regular business? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Council President Martz.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve the consent calendar as listed in this evening's agenda with the minute substitutions as noted by the clerk.
Thank you.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar with the amended set of minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. That carries unanimously. Next item on our agenda this evening, under regular business, is ID 0437, Puget Sound Regional Council Vision 2050. This item was previously before council at the April 1st council meeting. There was a presentation from PSRC. And at the April 8th work session, there was a staff presentation and public comment. Tonight, following a brief presentation, council will be asked to provide direction on the Vision 2050 regional growth alternatives. PSRC is accepting comments through April 29th as part of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. I'd like to ask Economic and Development Services Director Keith Niven to make the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, City Council. Keith Niven, Director of Economic Development and Development Services. So this evening, we are going to continue our conversation about the draft supplemental environmental impact statement currently being worked on by Puget Sound Regional Council. We initially had a presentation on April 1st. And then at your April 8th council work session, there was an opportunity for public comment. And then this evening, we'll move towards, I think, a conclusion on this particular topic. So what we're talking about is the four-county Metro Seattle Central Puget Sound vision framework, which was called Vision 2040. And what Puget Sound Regional Council is doing is updating that Vision 2040 to what they're calling Vision 2050. And it accommodates the anticipated growth that the new forecasts have modeled out for the region. And what's being discussed is basically an environmental impact statement. It's a supplemental environmental impact statement and not a new environmental impact statement, because the alternatives that are being considered are basically an evolution of what was considered for 2040. And where we are today is, as you can see from the middle box, we are in a comment period for the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, and Puget Sound Regional Council has asked for comment on the three alternatives that are under consideration right now. So I'm going to walk you through those this evening. We'll talk about the differences between the three and see if the City Council wants to move forward our recommendation for consideration by PSRC. So the first alternative, I'm going to call it alternative one, is called Stay the Course. And it basically just takes the existing framework that's in 2040 and moves it out another 10 years. The second alternative, which is called Transit Focused Growth, takes a different approach by focusing more of the growth around high-capacity transit and transit stations. And it actually identifies 75% of the future growth will be within walking distance of those facilities. And then alternative three, which they're calling Reset the Growth, actually distributes more of the forecasted growth out to unincorporated county areas as well as rural areas and smaller cities within the planning area. One of the questions that was asked last time was to take a look at the distribution of planned growth by county. As you can see, populations in the top table, employments in the bottom table. As you can see, for both the transit-focused growth and the reset urban growth, the population increases by in excess of basically about 221,000 people. And you can see the changes by county from that. That's King County, by the way. And then in employment, again, you can see under alternatives 2 and 3, there's a slight increase in employment forecasts for King County. But there's just a big difference between the population and employment. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So where we are, so we are a core city, as I mentioned before. As you can see, alternative 1, which is right here. Under alternative 2, there's a slight increase in planned population for core cities. And under alternative 3, there's actually a decrease in planned population for core cities. But as you can see, the unincorporated areas and the rural areas are increasing significantly under alternative 3. Similarly, for employment, there's a slight decrease for core cities under the transit-focused growth. We can talk about that a little bit if you'd like. And then under alternative 3, there's a more significant reduction in forecasted employment for core cities. And as you can see, again, similar to population, under alternative 3, the employment is believed to rise in those areas. Yes, sir.
Sorry, these are all growth versus where we're at today. So it isn't a decrease. I think people may misunderstand what you're saying. It's not like some of these involve having fewer jobs. They just have less growth than the other options.
It's
they're
a
all tons new people and
Yes.
tons more jobs.
Thank you for the clarification. Is it a reduction in the forecast of growth? Are the words I was looking for.
Excellent.
All right, so let's now, what I wanted to do now is actually just start a conversation about the 3 alternatives, and then let you guys kind of weigh in where you want to. So I'm going to start with alternative 3. And alternative 3 is the really let's disperse more of the growth into those areas that are currently less served by transit, by infrastructure. So if you look at the detriment column, so what we're looking at is we're increasing population. The forecast for population growth for those areas is increasing by 221,000 for King County. This is just in King County. And the jobs are 20,000. And so if you look at that, in my mind, that's out of balance. And these are areas that are not served by transit very well. And so what you're talking about is basically adding a significant amount of commuter traffic where those folks will be driving to their jobs, which will not be located in the same locations based on the forecasted growth figures. And so, under this scenario, The environmental impacts will likely be more. Infrastructure improvements will be probably further needed than what's there now. And so as I looked at alternative 3, there was not a lot of advantage, I think, to the region to support alternative 3. And I'm just throwing that out there as my evaluation of that alternative. Alternative 1 and 2, so alternative 1 is what the current framework is. And sometimes you have to say, well, if you're going to deviate from the existing framework or the existing alternative, there should be an advantage to go with something different. And so as you look at alternative 2, some of the things that I think are good about alternative 2 is actually identifying a measure of 75% of the growth within walking distance to transit infrastructure. I think it's good to put a metric on that. You could also basically assume that even though the jobs and population growth for King County are similar to alternative 3, there's going to be that increase in growth is going to happen proximate to transit infrastructure, and the expectation is that hopefully most of that growth will be able to utilize that part of kind of our transportation network and will not result in the same number of, say, traffic and regional traffic issues that would happen under alternative 3. So, I think I'm going to kind of stop at this point and let you guys maybe ask questions. I think the question maybe at hand is, if you agree that alternative 3, that there's not a reason to really talk about alternative 3, then maybe what might be most productive for this conversation would be to talk about the differences between alternative 1 and 2 and see if there are advantages to one versus the other, and I don't mean alternative 1 or the other, that you would want to make a recommendation to PSRC to support.
I'm just going to summarize it a little differently.
Sure.
There is no formal motion tonight, but there is a potential recommendation. So they're not absolutely required to make a recommendation. They can decide tonight if they want to make a recommendation on one of these alternatives.
Correct.
They could also choose not to.
Correct.
And then we're also going to have a discussion with the council about potential additional council review of 2050. So by the end of the night tonight, we'll also go to the question of, you want to have additional conversation at a future date on some of the policy language.
On the
that's currently
policies,
being
right,
reviewed.
because the 3 alternatives is due at the end of the month.
Okay, great. Council President Mertz.
Several questions. First off, this presentation isn't in our packet, is it?
So I changed this slide. So this slide is new. The rest of the presentation, and I added the growth chart, but that's out of the EIS. So all I did was I changed this, and then I added this to help the conversation this evening. And I did that today. Unfortunately, I just got back from being out for a week, so I couldn't have done that last week. My apologies.
Okay, fair enough, because one of my next questions has to do with one of the slides that was added. So if you can go back up to the trend line that had jobs and housing.
Yes, sir. That was out of the SES.
I mean, one of the things that I noticed about that is if you say growth in actual forecasts, these are totals. One of the things I notice is that the employment fraction goes up quite a bit over time, right? So we reach in around 2010, if you want to say the number of jobs per people in the region, right?
Yep.
It hit a local minima about 2010. And ever since then has been going back up. Like, it was well below 50%, right?
Yep.
If you look at 2010, well below 50%, the ratio of jobs to people, right? But by 2050, it's over 50%. That's quite a change demographically. What's fueling that change?
So I can't answer that. These are numbers from PSRC that they're getting from OFM. So
It's such a sea change.
Yeah.
It's not like, I mean, I just, down the road, I would like an answer to that, because it really, it tells me that there's a fundamental demographic shift that's going on in the Puget Sound area that I don't understand.
I will definitely convey that comment back to PSRC.
Then the next question I have is on where you've got your impact of each of the three options by county.
This one?
Explain again why Stay the Course has so much less King County growth than the others? It's got like a third less growth than the others. And double the growth in Port Kitsap County.
Are you on population?
Yes.
Okay. So let me see if I can reframe your question. So is your question, why are the other three counties better represented under Stay the Course than they are the other two alternatives?
I just don't understand why King County's growth would be so much less under Stay the Course. It just, philosophically, I don't, as you've explained the three options, can you tell me why, in a short answer, why?
I will look to Councilmember Winterstein, who sits on GMPB, and maybe this has come up in their conversations.
Well, and certainly for transit-focused growth, the idea is creating more dense housing in proximity to what they call transit stations. And that is a change from what Stay the Course does. Because Stay the Course looks for most of its growth in regional centers, such as we have a regional growth center. So the transit-focused stations, if we plan for more growth around these stations, that's more growth outside of the regional centers. And the Kitsap and Pierce and Snohomish counties do not have, and it's not forecasted to have, as much high-capacity transit stations as King County would. So it's more, it's not, I don't look at it as Stay the Course as less, like where we're growing less. It's just that transit-oriented, transit-focused growth pulls more into those stations in King County that don't exist in those other counties.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And my final question is, with option 3, does option 3 presuppose growth outside the urban growth boundary line?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I have the answer. So we're a little bit of an anomaly in that we have no longer any PAAs, potential annexation areas, other than one on Cougar Mountain that we don't want. But there are some significant potential annexation areas in King County, one outside of Federal Way and one outside of Seattle, that would be significant kind of growth areas. I assume the other counties have similar PAAs around their communities that are within the UGAs. The way that this is described is kind of cities, unincorporated PAAs, and rural areas. Now, I don't know why, because for me, I don't think the GMA is allowing us to push growth into rural areas. And so I don't know if Paul has a better answer than that, because it doesn't make sense with my understanding of GMA either.
Yeah, no, this is still in compliance and alignment with the goals of GMA. It's just more dispersed outside of, as you said, in unincorporated and in rural areas, and there are denser areas in unincorporated parts of the counties. So it's seeing more growth in those areas, but still completely in alignment with, without moving the line, in alignment with the goals of GMA. It's just more dispersed than in the regional centers as the other two plans.
Okay, I'm skeptical that there's much rural land that's inside the urban growth boundary, but nobody likes this option anyhow, so that's fine.
Questions? Councilmember Hunt.
My first question is on this slide. Transit-focused growth and reset urban growth have the same numbers in every column. So, but these counties have different percentages of, or different core cities, different areas, so I don't understand how that works out.
So because it's not our source data, I think we can capture your question, and then Keith can get a response from PSRC, because it's not data coming from us, it's coming from them. But that's a good question.
I don't have an
Very
answer
general.
to that question either, council member. It's a good question.
Okay, so then for them, for PSRC, my other part of that question would be, is it then that within each county, there is a different allocation among that county's core cities, et cetera, but it doesn't, you don't see the growth moving from like a core city in one county to the next county, that it's done all at county level? That's the only way this, I can think that this.
So I think there's analysis that can be done at the county level. So these are the charts that are showing that county difference or delta based on the three alternatives. And then you get to the metropolitan cities, the core cities, the rural, the other chart, which shows you how, and so this, I think the assumption is because they did not provide different charts at this level by county. I think the assumption I was making is that this is that the model is projecting this out county by county at the same rates. Does that make sense? So the numbers would be different, but the fluctuation by alternative would be consistent county by county. I can ask that question as well.
Thank you. That would be great to know. I am interested in the answer to this because currently the two options, both the one that's the recommended option, the transit-oriented growth, and the reset urban growth have the same numbers, but the other option, the first stay the course, has different options per counties. So either one we switch to, if we choose a recommendation other than stay the course, it has actually the same. So I would just like to understand how that's working out.
Sure.
Okay, and then could you go to the benefits and detriments slide, please? Would it be, so these are points that were put together by staff?
Yes.
Okay, so would it be safe to say then that possible detriments to stay the course are the inverse of the possible benefits under the other two?
The other alternatives, yes.
And then I had, and then related to Council President Mart's questions about that other slide with the rate of employment, and I guess I'm wondering too about if these 1% difference in the employment is within
margin.
Yeah, I would think that with, there's a lot of error around predictions and a lot of things that are out of the control of any of us or out of the ability of anyone to predict, and 1% here or there is probably well within that error. So if we could get some ballpark estimate on error on these,
yes.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. Keith, can you explain why the Issaquah Highlands garage would not meet the definition of the high-capacity transit station areas?
So I've been chasing this quite a bit. So if you read the definition, and I can pop down, I actually edited it. So the transit-focused growth alternative assumes an explicit goal for 75% of the region's population and employment growth to occur within a quarter to a half mile from current and planned high-capacity transit station areas, including light rail, bus rapid transit, commuter rail, ferries, and streetcar. So right now, we don't have any of those, except for, the question that I was struggling with was bus rapid transit. So depending on your definition, and some define bus rapid transit as bus service that has dedicated infrastructure. So if you think about the SR 900 garage, I'm going to go to the Highlands later, but let's start with the SR 900 garage. There is actually an HOV lane coming off of I-90 that basically allows that bus, because I've ridden it, to bypass the traffic queue that's happening on SR 900 and make its way to that facility. So under some definitions, that garage would comply with a definition of bus rapid transit. Now, having discussed this with PSRC today, because I actually asked them a bunch of questions about that, they right now are not considering either of our garages as part of the BRT system. And so neither of our garages would qualify under what they're looking at for a high-capacity transit station. So, which would get me to a point where if we're thinking like we're leaning towards alternative 2, maybe we would want to suggest an edit to the definitions for what a high-capacity transit station would be. So for the Highlands, I think clearly because there isn't a dedicated HOV lane up to that facility, it's definitely farther down the pecking order than our SR 900 garage would be.
Okay. Can you walk us through attachment C that does look at that potential for 75% growth?
Attachment C?
I think it's the previous
map.
slide, the map.
This one. All right, so what we did was we basically, we took a look at, so this is the Highlands garage here with the dark yellow is the quarter mile, and are they both showing? Oh, they're actually both showing up, great. And then the lighter yellow is would be the half mile. And so what we did is we basically took our buildable lands analysis and our existing zoning, and we forecasted out where we would likely get additional residential growth. This isn't employment. Right now, this is just a map of potential population growth. So this was looking at the housing ad to see if we could get potentially 75% of our anticipated housing growth to happen within. And at this time, and the ask I made was to look at our 3 locations, assuming we would include our 2 existing garages. Now, when I talked to PSRC about the garages, I want to make sure that I get this on the table, is, this is a planning document for a long time. And part of what we know about our garages are typically full by 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on the work days. And what you want to do from a planning perspective is you want to get more use out of that infrastructure investment than what we're getting today. And the only way you can do that is providing more service. And the only way that you provide more service is you provide more riders. And if the garage is already full, then you need people to be able to walk or bike to those facilities if they're going to actually use the transit. And so I think part of the discussion is, and the reason for, potentially suggesting that those significant park and ride facilities be included in this is that those are hubs for transit use now. And I think depending on what we do today and how we form our policies will dictate whether they increase and how much they increase in usage over the next 30 years. So that's just something to think about in terms of as we kind of walk through the rest of this.
So if I'm looking at this map,
Yep.
I understand where our existing park and rides are. How come that yellow quarter mile comes down toward what is basically Gilman and Front?
This one?
Yeah, in that portion.
So right now, we don't exactly know where our rail station is going.
Okay, so it's a representation of the idea that the rail station will be somewhere in that region, and thus there will be a quarter mile from that.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Council Member Winterstein, followed by Council President Martz.
I'll give it my time too.
Okay, Council President Martz.
So in looking at the DSEIS, it looks like those totals by county are assigned. Like looking at the supporting data, it looks like those are sort of by fiat, and then they're divvied out by cities, core cities, and it gives information about how it would impact each of the sub areas. But I think it's a top-down thing, which is why they're identical between those two columns, which means utility is somewhat less on that. But I'll also answer my own question about the percentage of land that's inside the urban growth boundary that would be rural or unincorporated. Indeed, in King County, it's very, very low, 4%, but Pierce and Snohomish are much, much, much higher, which is why it's a bigger factor there.
Thank you for answering your own question.
So I'm hearing, just through the questions that you're asking, that there's a lot of issues with the understandability of the PSRC data. And so I guess I have a question for the group. Are you clear on whether or not you want to make comments on at this stage, since the opportunities are limited after tonight? Any thoughts on that? Councilmember Richardson?
Yeah, I'd really, really would like our council to make some recommendation on the alternatives for the draft supplemental EIS. That's the question on the table. It's going to be what alternative? The GMPB, we will be debating this, and if our council can speak with one voice about an alternative with comments, then that, we all know, carries a lot more weight. And the question, so there's my input. I mean, understanding data is important. The question in front of us tonight is, of the three alternatives, do we want to lend our voice to one of those? We may have to live with some ambiguity in the data, but I think the alternatives at a high level are distinct enough. I'm hoping that we can make a call like that still in light of the fact there may be some uncertainty and some uncertainty about the numbers and the meaning behind the numbers. I think that would be very important.
Thank you. So thoughts from others? Councilmember Hunt, Council President Mertz?
So I do have this one ambiguity, my primary ambiguity, which is around why Reset Urban Growth would have the same numbers as transit-focused growth. However, it's more a question in my mind about why, I think I understand why Stay the Course and transit-focused growth are different, and then I don't really understand why Reset Urban Growth is the same as transit-focused. So my question is really about Reset Urban Growth, which is also not probably the one that we'll be considering this evening. So I am comfortable with that ambiguity in mind. I am comfortable that at a high level, the transit-focused growth seems like the option that seems to be best in line with what I hear from the community about making transportation more efficient. It seems like it has, as far as the environmental impacts, it seems like it has the least environmental impacts, partly because of that increased transportation efficiency. And overall, at a high level, it seems like the option that's sort of minimizing sprawl and the best option aligns with our previous city vision and our previous city planning. So I'm comfortable with saying at this time that I'm in support of the transit-focused growth.
Okay, Councilmember Ray, and then Councilmember Walsh. I forgot. Council President Martz, then Ray, then Walsh.
So I have to say I'm feeling the rare curmudgeonly this evening towards this whole thing. I don't like this entire methodology. It's not results oriented. It's not towards what, as a region, do we define livability? Do we define how we want our community, our larger community? When I say community, you say 5-county metro area. How we want it to look. And so therefore, you don't get anything considering history, right? You don't get anything of where we are today. You don't get any consideration of diversity of housing. You don't get any consideration of diversity of employment. And that's no way to run a railroad. So my heart is with transit-focused growth, right? Because that's the way it's supposed to work. But I'm worried that we're going to be made chumps in this process. I'm worried that we who have given so much in changing our community to accept growth, is going to get re-zeroed out with communities that haven't given as much, that haven't transformed themselves as much, and that we're going to get slathered with the same huge numbers as anybody else. I mean, it's great that we have the transit that we have. We are likely, question mark, to get high capacity transit at some point in the future, maybe. But so I'm nervous, right? My heart's with transit focused growth, but boy, oh boy, it would be so unfair to this community to then go into a process that doesn't consider all that this city has done in the 15 years that I've lived here to transform itself to accept growth.
Councilmember Ray.
Thank you. Can we get really local for just a moment, Keith? So if we were to go with transit-focused growth as opposed to stay the course, because I think those are the two that are on the table, what's it mean to the city of Issaquah in terms of new residents and new jobs in 2050?
That's a great question. So this trickles down from PSRC to the county to us through our comp plan and our targets, right? And so one of the reasons, Councilmember Ray, that I wanted us to look at this was to answer one of the biggest questions that I think was on the table is if we supported Alternative 2, which now has a metric of 75% of your growth is going to happen within walking distance of transit facility, whatever that might be defined as, could we accommodate that with our existing zoning and our existing buildable lands analysis, or would we have to upzone? If we ultimately, to Councilmember Martz's place, are we drinking some Kool-Aid that later we might regret? So I think what this did for me was to say, we have capacity right now. Again, I think if we can say locally that we can count at least our SR 900 garage. The one up in the Highlands, I think, is additive as well, but we could probably figure out a way to accommodate those 900 units if we had to on the valley floor. But one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that we had the existing zoning and capacity to accommodate 75% of our growth without having to do a massive upzone. We've already done that with Central Issaquah plan. So I think from that perspective, I think we're okay. If you go back to, again, this is a, oops, wrong way, sorry. This is a planning model, right? So a lot of things can translate between a forecasted model and actual reality in the field. Will this mean that if we accept Alternative 2 and that ultimately gets folded into the recommended framework for 2050, that we will see an increase because we're a core city in population? And to Councilmember Hunt's point, if the model shows 1%, is that even worth, is anybody going to notice even if it happens? I don't know the answer to that. So I think we're at this high level 4-county planning framework trying to dive down now to a local conversation. I don't know that it translates to, this gets back to my initial comment from 2 weeks ago. You don't really have 3 distinctly different alternatives. It's not 3 completely different fruit. It's a red apple, a green apple, and a kind of a mixed apple. I mean, they're all 3 very close to each other. I think once you can get past the take 3 off the table, 1 and 2 are such close cousins. I don't know that we would see a difference either way, council member. Sorry for that really long answer.
Did you have a follow-up, Chris? Or
Yeah, I probably do, if I can just have a second to kind of digest everything I just heard. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it doesn't matter if we go 1 or 2 from an Issaquah perspective, we're probably going to get the same number of people and the same number of jobs?
So and I'll maybe phone a friend and ask Councilmember Winterstein to weigh in. I believe, again, thinking about this in terms of framework, right now we're talking about 3 alternatives. I think whichever alternative we pick, if we want to pick one to recommend to PSRC, it will then inform the policies. And the policies are where it starts to get a lot more real in terms of the policies and the actions that are being proposed by PSRC in each of the environmental elements of the EIS. So if we pick, say, the transit-focused growth alternative, there will be certain policies that respond to that alternative that are different than if ultimately stay the course is chosen as the preferred alternative. So this informs then the policy direction that comes next. And as Councilmember Winterstein said, that conversation is really like June, July of this year.
So I have a hard time picking an option when I can't distinguish the two of them. So for me, I mean, I understand where people are coming from. I can't get behind anything other than saying I don't think 3 makes any sense. But if you can't give me a better distinction between option number 1 and option number 2, I really can't get on board with saying that we support 1 or 2, because their margin of error are insignificant. So, toss up. So that's kind of where my heart's at.
Okay. Councilmember Goodman, and then Councilmember Batiste.
I think Councilmember
Mariah, you're up first.
So, Keith, a question in the language that you had proposed about the Highlands Park. Could you go to that slide? I'm wondering if other cities might be in a similar situation, if you have any other core cities that might be in a similar situation where they have maybe not everything on the list, but significant park and ride facilities.
So there will most likely be other cities that would qualify to have a, if my take on it would be a significant park and ride would be more than 500 stalls. And so there are going to be communities in the 4-county region that have those facilities that this will probably be a bigger deal to than us. Because of our regional growth center and the zoning that we have for that and our planned future rail station puts us in a little bit different place than maybe some that aren't going to receive those facilities down the road. So, this I think is germane. It's going to sound like I'm going off reservation, but I think it also attends to Councilmember Ray's comment, is I think the way this all plans out is the difference between the two, stay the course and the transit-focused alternative, is it plays out in how PSRC potentially allocates transportation revenues, right? I mean, because that's really what they're doing. All of this kind of leads to that focus of how they then disperse the monies that they are given to disperse to transportation and transit improvements. Under Alternative 2, it says we're going to take, I don't know if you can say 75% of our revenue and put it towards transit, where that is not as clear under the stay the course alternative. And I don't want to connect too many dots, and I'll look to Councilmember Winterstein's help on this if he wants to weigh in on it. But that's kind of the bottom line for the difference between 1 and 2, I think, is it puts more of the eggs in one basket and says, we're going to now focus our investment in transportation infrastructure in transit, at least a significant piece of it, more than what we have maybe under the current. See, under the current thing, the shiny object is the regional growth center. And they're scattered all over the place. And so now this is taking that and taking it to a more focused outcome, potentially, by providing that level of clarity. I'll just offer that.
Thank you. I was just curious about that. I think that if we're going down the transit-oriented focus, that language is important. This is a tough one. When I look at the transit-focused growth Alternative 2, it really does seem to match with our growth philosophy and our focus on the Central Issaquah Plan and just being able to have that focus around transit and it being the most environmentally responsible. And I think that, so really, I've been focused in on alternative 2, and alternative 3 seems like less likely, but I'm stuck between 1 and 2, just because I feel like we don't have a lot of data. We've got very different numbers, and we're saying that they're similar. But when I look at the population growth around that, they don't seem that similar. So I'd like to better understand the numbers. I'm leaning toward number 2, but I feel like we need more information.
Okay, Councilmember Goodman, Councilmember Winterstein, Councilmember Hunt.
I don't totally understand alternative 3, if that's just out there just to be this, don't pick this, nobody will. But so why is it there? So I guess I don't understand what the potential merits would be. So I guess I'm not so much a no on that as I'm hearing from others. The difference between the stay the course and the transit-focused growth for me is right there in the numbers. It's over 200,000 people. And, you keep saying that it might not make as big a difference to Issaquah, whether we choose one or the other. But we're a really fairly small city, and any increases are going to make a big difference. And it says on one of the pages that the alternative 2, it's going to exceed our Central Issaquah Plan EIS. I would imagine we'll have to do more studies on that. I frankly don't know how much more we take, how much more we can take. And the shiny object, the first go-around with all of this was all of the money for transportation projects. And I'm not sure that anybody who lives and works around here would say that we've been better off for that since the decision that we made in 2012 or 13. So I'm concerned about 1 and 2. Transit-focused growth, it sounds really good. But I don't know how much of a difference that is, maybe it's the best decision for the region, but I don't know if that's the best decision for Issaquah. So I don't know if we're going to be able to pick one. Maybe we can provide a list of concerns that we have and then weigh in the summer again.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein?
Thank you. Keith, can you get tonight's packet up on the screen?
I can.
There is a table in it, and as you're searching for that, if my colleagues want to look on page 174 of tonight's packet, it's table 3.5-1, summary comparison of alternatives to stay the course. I think there's some good information in here that sheds a lot of light on what is being asked. One of the things it does is it breaks down both population and employment by what they call regional geographies, those being metropolitan cities, core cities, high-capacity transit communities, which is the new element, cities and towns, urban and unincorporated, and rural. Go on. So keep going. Keep going. Right there. You just went past it. You went right there. So Keith, zoom in on that a little bit. You can, right there in the bottom right, click plus. Click it again and again. All right, now
Tell me when you can read it.
Center that. So this sheds a little, I want to make one comment first, and then I'm going to look at these numbers. I think these numbers tell me that table where it shows the alternative 2 and alternative 3 to have similar distributions by county is probably wrong in alternative 3. These numbers and the other bar charts that are in the packet don't agree with the numbers that are in that table that we looked at earlier. They just don't agree.
Right.
And so I think it's why this one is so important is we are a core city. And Stay the Course says 28% of the growth through 2050 will happen in core cities. Transit Focused Growth says 29% of the growth will happen in core cities. My own personal interpretation is that this is a look forward of over 30 years, and that's within the margin of error. It's very difficult to nail that. That's saying in the four-county region, core cities will be about the same, will have about the same amount of growth. The real difference is when you get to reset urban growth, there's a reduction because less would be in all of the cities. There's less in metropolitan, and there's less in core. There's less in the high-capacity transit communities.
And then there's a big
And then there's
jump
big jumps in the other areas, right? And then the other thing to jump out here is that new regional geography called high-capacity transit communities. And you can see the real difference in that in Alternative 2, where they would receive 23% of the growth, whereas the other alternatives, they would only receive 18% of the growth. And what that represents is outside of those cities, metropolitan core cities, where there are these bus rapid transit stations, there would be more growth in proximity to those. And so that's where the biggest change would come. There would be less in cities and towns. There'd be less in the unincorporated. There'd be less of the growth in rural. Most of it would be in these high-capacity transit communities. And I think that these numbers, when they split it across out by these regional geographies, I think tells a better picture, what we were trying to see in the data earlier. And you can see the same below. The bottom row deals with employment. And you see similar, employment, the density around the high-capacity transit communities is mostly about housing. They don't expect to get that many more jobs there. So you don't really see that spread across that big difference as you do in population with the numbers. So I think this chart is very revealing. And I think the other thing, if you could go back to your chart, your graph, which shows our city, this region where the light rail station may go, and our transit community, your slide 11.
This one?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to get to that. I was just asking. So high-capacity transit stations is defined in the EIS, and it's not a community. It's and you had the definition up there. It is about light rail stations. They're called stations, but it's stations, or it's commuter rail, or it's ferry, and it's these bus rapid transit lines. And by that definition, our transit centers are not HCT.
Right.
They are not by that definition. And I can earlier this month during the GMPB meeting, there was by far the most interesting conversation about that policy. And what's odd, I think what's going to be a struggle for PSRC is that the definition they used during their EIS, when they put together the draft supplemental EIS, did not include stations like this. So they didn't do analysis around with these type of transit centers in their EIS. But my sense was, and what I heard there, and what I would, if my council members are so inclined, I feel strongly that we should push for the recognition of transit stations like ours in that HCT definition. And if we were successful with that, then I think what you're showing with this numbers, that even with our existing zone capacity and proximity of all of these areas in our city, then through comp plan changes, we wouldn't have to do any upzoning. Our current land use and zoning that's in place would already be in alignment with the goals for transit-oriented growth, Alternative 2. But I think it does take the entire GMPB, or at least majority agreeing that we should include this. Now, I will say that back on the April 4th meeting, there was a lot of light bulbs that went on about what the what the meaning of a high-capacity transit was, and that high-capacity transit stations, because it put more growth in places that people didn't realize it was going in, because it says bus stops. It says a stop is a station, and it didn't account for these. It didn't account for existing transit centers in that definition. So I think that conversation started earlier this month. I know it's going to continue. And this is exactly the kind of deliberation that the staff at PSRC is absolutely dependent upon us having. I think that, and I will, I don't want to speak conclusively for my colleagues from Sound Cities who are in the caucus with me, but I think there's a general agreement and understanding of this idea that our existing infrastructures, such as these, should be included in that definition, and we'll continue to carry forth that conversation and support for that idea. So I think it gets to the question that Chris asked about what would be the difference. Potentially none at all for us. Core cities aren't seen as growing significantly different under either alternative. And we are a core city. So what that means is that OFM and then the counties wouldn't be allocating more growth to us than is under the existing plan. So without getting more allocations to core cities and therefore to us, I don't think it's a strong deviation from the path that we're already on. And if indeed, this chart and what it shows of our capacity within proximity of our transit stations already exists, then that would mean that we wouldn't even be looking at comp plan changes to accommodate even the alternative two.
I'm not sure if it was, did you have your hand up earlier, Vicki?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's going to be Hunt, Martz, and Walsh.
That's okay. I had my hand up the whole time.
Okay. So I did want to mention that in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, there's a number of other topics that are considered other than what we've been talking about. So one of them is emissions. And I think that at the higher level, rather than trying to think, because we do have this estimate about what is going to happen with core cities, but we don't have a projection, and I think it wouldn't make sense to have a projection for what specifically will happen, how this might influence Issaquah, because there are so many other things. So I think that at a higher level, looking at some of these issues like emissions for the entire region and how they would change under the different alternatives makes sense. And there is information about that. There's projected pollutant emissions tons per day. Transit-focused growth has the least, and stay the course is in the middle. Reset urban growth has the highest emissions. So there's information about that, and there's information about other environmental impacts. And I think that at the high level, the transportation-focused growth makes sense. And then looking at this 1% increased population, 1% decreased population, when you look at what these projections are based on, it's just sort of a straight trend line that is an estimate of what the best guess is. And I think that based on that, looking at these other projections about the impacts and about how we know we need to, how I think we know we need to grow in a transit-oriented way as a region, I'm very much in favor of the transit-oriented option.
Councilmember Walsh, Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. So I would encourage anybody who has questions about this to read the 2050 draft SEIS. It's 227 pages worth of information about the, as you said, the tonnage of pollutants, the, parcel sizes, everything. It's very clear to me after reading this that the benefits of transit-oriented growth are huge for our region. I think additionally, for a long time we have planned population and growth and we have planned transit and traffic and congestion on two separate arms, I view this as a huge way to tie those two together, to not plan for growth that is inevitable and handle the transportation after, to tie the two together and say they are essentially one, that you cannot plan for growth without knowing how those people are going to travel. And so if this presents the opportunity to tie those together and potentially then tie the dollar amounts together to provide benefits to the communities that are dealing with those additional people, I think that's huge. Where I think I differ potentially with Councilmember Winterstein is looking at the Vision 2050, the high capacity transit, it's almost like those areas are defined only because they're not a core city and they happen to have transit. I think as PSRC gets into this more and realizes and has those conversations, we're probably going to realize that, oh, if we're trying to put more population into areas with transit, that's going to include the core cities and the major cities. And so I think those numbers might end up shifting around a little bit, because when I read the definition for HCTs, it basically says anything with a light rail current or proposed station. I'm like, that's us. So I think we probably will see more of that growth than is necessarily suggested in the document if we go in that direction. I still think it's the right way to go because it ties those two methods together.
Thank you. Council President Martz.
So a couple things. So Appendix B of the DSEIS is supporting data. And if you look at it, what it says is that under the stay the course option, King County's share of the growth in core cities would be 272,000 people. Under the growth, what's it called? Sorry, transit-focused growth, it's 346,000 people. So it's a 27% increase. And so the chart that Councilmember Winterstein pointed out, those are fractions of the already noted different target numbers, right? I did the math, and that's how those fractions work, right? So it's a 27% higher allocation to King County core cities. Likewise, the same data says that HCT goes from stay the course of 58,000 to transit focus 92,000, or a 60% larger increase. So these options, and again, my heart is towards transit focused growth, but you know, I'm worried because tonight I'm not sure. I feel like some of the data we feel is a little loosey-goosey and aren't really totally sure what we're talking about buying into, as this being an example. I think the other thing that we're hearing tonight is some real fear, uncertainty, and doubt around ST3. There was the comment about what does the Urban Growth Center, what has it gotten us, what was the shiny object? I mean, the shiny object was ST3 and was, okay, maybe, I guess it wasn't. Never mind.
I'll talk after you.
My view is that thus far, the big thing that we have gotten from Urban Growth Center that we wouldn't have had otherwise was rapid transit, and we're not sure that's going to happen, right? And that's what some of this is about. I think if all of us felt sure that in 2041 our kids were going to be taking the train from Issaquah to downtown Seattle, I think some of our concerns around the transit-focused growth would go away. But I think right now, for a variety of reasons, not just potential initiatives this fall, but also cost overruns that are occurring on ST3 already, I think that's an element of this tonight. And I don't know how you untie that, Gordian, not because it's a fundamental aspect of where we're at on ST3, but it's out there, and I think it's an element of what you're hearing tonight.
I'm taking some notes because I think what I'm hearing is maybe the council would like to support an alternative, but if they do, it's going to come heavily caveated. Councilmember Goodman.
I just wanted to point out that that was one potential shiny new object, because we hadn't gotten to that point yet. But the real shiny object was all the transportation dollars. And that pot of money has become more and more diluted with every single year. And there's huge competition for that money. I realize we can't build our way out of the transportation problem by just building new roads. But what's left, what gets distributed is monies for huge new projects. And a town of our size doesn't always have a huge project that we can compete for. So I stated that concern in 2013 when we were making this decision about the center. And within a year, there was talk at SCA about competition for transportation dollars, which has come true. So, I feel similar to Tola. I'm just kind of torn because of the difference between paper and projections and realities.
Okay. Chris or Mariah, would you like to weigh in?
I think I've weighed.
Which was, help me out.
I can't support
don't have
either
enough.
one or two. I could support saying we think the third option is a non-starter. But there's not enough data that's been presented, even in the EIS, that would draw a clear distinction in my mind between 1 and 2 for this city, and I represent this city first.
Okay. Mariah?
I haven't really changed where I was at before. I feel like we're choosing between 1 and 2, and those would be the best options to look at, and I'm leaning toward transit. I think that we have a lot of outstanding questions, and I do feel that we really do have sound transit out there. I feel like the definition that we talked about earlier and my question around that, I think that that's really important. And I think that I'm hoping that that is discussed going forward. But I think we need more information between 1 and 2. I'm still leaning toward 2. But.
Okay. So this is polling of all 7 of you. My notes show that 4 of you aren't strongly weighing in and selecting a 1, 2, or 3. Some are saying it's not a 3, but I'm hearing from 4 of you that it's not absolutely a 1 or a 2. So how and what do we want to do with our opportunity to comment at this point in time? Do we want to write a letter? I'm going to throw a few suggestions out there. Do we want to write a letter talking about not supporting 3? Do we want to then say that 1 and 2 could be an option, but there's not enough information because we have the following unanswered questions? Councilman President Mertz, Councilman Wilson.
I'll let the GMPV go first.
Thank you. First, a comment I wanted to make real quickly. I appreciate both Vicki and mentioning that the other environmental impacts that are out there. Those are pretty significant, about less land development, less impervious surface, actually less redevelopment, which actually improves stormwater if you do more redevelopment. Those numbers are very important environmental factors that are also, we don't have them all represented in our packet tonight, but those are key parts of the EIS, so there's that. I think it's important for me so I've got 2 hats to wear, right? I'm on the GMPV, and this absolutely is a 4-county question in front of us as it is. At the same time, having to look at, okay, what would be the impact for our own city and what we think would be the best. And so for me, at a regional level, it's easy for me at a regional level. I think it goes really well what was said earlier about, listen, we're planning on an infrastructure investment. Let's get the most leverage out of that. And that is the focus. That is the primary reason. And I think the EIS does show that in many ways, displacement is a little bit worse around option number 2. But on balance, there's a lot of advantages over the other alternatives. So I think at a regional level, I can align myself with that easily. But when I look at the city and I think about the comments I've heard here tonight, I think, you know, it would help me the most if there was a regional kind of read, and then there was, but we have these concerns about our city. And then what that allows me to do as I work with my peers in SCA and that caucus, and as I work with staff and other members of GMPB and also at PSRC, is to make those points. Everybody comes and kind of makes their own case for their own, whether it be a city or a county or some other entity that they represent. And that's really important. Before coming in here, I felt this thing about our transit centers being included in high-capacity transit stations. I thought that was a really important thing to battle for, and I think there's some support for that. But if there's more so Mary Lou, to your question, this, a statement of not in favor of 3 and unsure about 1 or 2, if that was very clear about, potential concerns about what the impact may be to Issaquah. That would be most helpful, because the question in front of us tonight is picking between 3 growth strategies. And then all that work in the policy development, and there are there's hundreds of policies that we're working through. Those are really what's going to shape what happens on the ground. In terms of equity and environment and distribution and all the other factors that are measured in the EIS. So if there was specific concerns about option 1 or 2 that could be included, I think that would be most useful now, because of the ongoing shaping of the policies that's going to be taking course over in the May and June timeframes.
Council President Martz.
So I think something similar. I think generally what we're hearing is that there is, broadly speaking, of the 3 options, an interest in the transit focused, but with a number of specific caveats. And I think it's important to articulate those, because you've heard a bunch of different ones from the 7 up on the dais. I think that becomes then talking points, as Paul mentions, for GMPB and GMPC, and sort of puts our stake in the ground as to where our concerns are. I think it's important to consider putting teeth into that conversation, because it's like, so what? Right? If you say, okay, go with transit-focused option, okay, fine, get on board, and then you're on board. I think it's important to talk about that if our concerns are realized, right? If light rail doesn't come to Issaquah, if we don't get transportation dollars, to Councilmember Goodman's point, you're going to see that's going to have implications politically in this area. I think it's going to cause a concern around the urban growth or the Growth Management Act, around the urban growth boundary line, around support regionally for transit initiatives, around support for tax initiatives broadly. I think this area supported ST3 because we believed the vision of ST3, and I think if something comes along next time and there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it won't support it. And people in this area, our successors, if it all breaks and we don't get transit dollars and we don't get light rail, our successors will say, open up Falls City, open up Preston, and that would be super, super bad. So I think I don't know how everybody feels, but I think there was a general consensus towards transit focus, but we articulate our concerns and we say, if these concerns are realized, these are the things we're worried about happening.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Councilmember Goodman, and then Deputy Council President Batiste. And I'd also like to encourage you, please, to give me more of those caveats if you have them. I've noted the ones that Council President Martz said. Councilmember Goodman.
Thanks. I like that idea. I would be in favor and would suggest potentially indicating the council's support for alternative 2 due to the regional benefits, but that the council wasn't unanimous on supporting an alternative because they had numerous concerns about the direct impacts to Issaquah. And then I would agree with Council President Martz on the several potential impacts and concerns that he mentioned. I don't have any more.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Council President Batiste.
So I feel like our conversation is evolving, and after listening to Councilmember Winterstein and talking about going back to have this conversation, I think it's important that we are giving some definition to how we're feeling, even though we still have those concerns. And from an environmental perspective and looking at this regionally, I think that this makes sense in terms of going down the pathway of the transit option number 2. And I do like the ideas that Council President Martz brought up in terms of just putting some teeth in there, and I would like there to be a discussion around the language that I pointed out earlier.
Councilmember Walsh.
So my concerns around the transit-focused growth alternative are whether there is whether the assumptions around the definition of the HCT communities is as solid as it could be, and whether in my mind, the core cities have a lot of the same infrastructure and transit stations and hubs that the HCT communities do, and are more built up. So I'm wondering whether the data behind that or the assumptions on that are solid, and if that means there would actually be more population in the core cities.
Okay. Others? Councilmember Ray or Hunt? Councilmember Hunt.
So one caveat that was mentioned, but I just wanted to make sure it was noted, was this displacement. It seems to be one of the few negatives on a large scale that is associated with the transit-oriented option. So I would like to, and in the full documentation of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, there is some list of, there's a list, it's pretty long actually, of mitigation measures, so things that cities can do to avoid that outcome, which I think is helpful, but I still think it should be raised because it is potentially important. So that would be one caveat and one concern, but again, environmentally, it seems best option for the region.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. Councilmember Goodman.
I was wondering if council will have an opportunity to review that before it goes out. And wondering, I think maybe our only opportunity, if we were going to do that, would be the 23rd, if we even have a committee of the whole meeting, or when's this due, the 29th?
Okay.
We had not built that into the timeline to have another step back with council. I think as we had set this up coming to you over this month, we had said this would be the opportunity where we take that input and then we would do our very best to convey that to PSRC by the end of the month. So we had not anticipated sharing a draft and seeking comment on that.
Other comments? Member Walsh?
Yeah, can we also mention in there, I think one of the concerns that we've heard is the sense of the growth that we have already taken in, and if this is meant to build out the potential population numbers that we're going to be expected to accommodate by 2050, that we don't want to see this as a reset of today going forward. We're going to be expected to take on the 30% growth that this anticipates without looking at that historical sense.
I would quantify that a little further and suggest that they explicitly look at how much cities have, how close they've come to hitting their 2040 targets when considering 2050 targets, and cities that have done more towards their 2040 targets should get a little bit more relief towards the 2050 targets.
Thank you. Councilmember Runerstein.
I want to comment about that. Thank you for that point. That plays directly into, I think, some of the policy formation that we're doing, because this is setting what they call they call them MPPs. Do you know what that stands for? I forget. It's the multi-county planning policies. That idea of because this is coming in the future, right? I'm not sure what year in the future we'll get new numbers, and the county will get its allegation, the city will, then each city will be asked, okay, what numbers are you going to take? That process. We have a chance to formulate a policy in this vision document to give guidance to that process, which could be a way of allowing a city to take credit for past growth in and above their allocation. I don't think that's part of the formula today, but that's what I just heard. I just think that's really good input. Thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
I know this is a silly time to be having a question, but I have a question.
Okay.
So is Issaquah a core city, or if we have Sound Transit, are we a high-capacity transit community, or are we both?
So my understanding is we are a core city. HCT is a place that's not currently a core city, but has like a existing or future rail station, or potentially a ferry terminal. And so the idea is right now they're kind of off the radar. And the idea is these things actually have infrastructure to support more growth. And so that's why they're jumping the way they are in the forecast. Does that make sense?
No, it's perfect. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah.
Councilmember Walsh, Councilmember Goodman.
If you want to look that up, Councilmember Wright, it's on page 81 of the draft SEIS. It defines exactly which communities are in
Which,
each of
great,
those.
thank you.
Yep. Councilmember Goodman. Nope. Any other comments? So we're writing a letter. We are saying that we do not believe alternative 3 is the best for the region. That generally the council is supportive of option 2 with about 5 or 6 caveats that talk specifically about Issaquah concerns. Also, I didn't know, Vicki, it's not a caveat, but I thought you wanted us to put in there that it's environmentally, it is the most solid one environmentally, so a plus on it, not just a concern that we might have with it, but that's a rationale to go for it.
And the displacement is, I believe,
And the
a regional.
displacement I have here
Yeah,
is
that's
yeah.
a regional, not Issaquah specific.
Correct. Is there anything else anybody wants to add? Okay.
Can I just make one comment, Mary Lou? Appreciate it. It's really been, it's kind of hard for me to be on that council when members from the King County Council or the Seattle Council or Pierce County Council or Snohomish County Council, all these bigger organizations, City of Bremerton, City of Everett all show up, and every representative shows up with a packet of information. They've got 4 or 10 pages of something that maybe multiple staff people have spent a lot of time on, and they've got all this research behind them, and it's tough for us smaller cities. We talk about this all the time. It's like, wow, I'm jealous that you've got that many resources behind you can get you that, and Keith has done a great job in helping me as much as possible. It is tougher for smaller cities like us. We don't have the same resources as some of the other players. But I envision what this letter is going to be exactly that kind of vehicle to give us maybe more influence than we've had before, just because, I mean, this is a big, heavy lift for this organization to do. We spent a lot of time on this. We just can't afford to do it like every single month for what's on the docket there. So I do really appreciate it, and I think this is a good time as any to have spent this much of our city time and resources on such an important topic. We meet almost every month. We have something that's really important, but I'm glad to be able to bring this, whatever this letter final form is. It's going to be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we'll move to good of the order. Do council members have anything for good of the order? I have a few meeting updates, that's it. Okay. On April 16th, we'll be having a special council workshop at 5 p.m. The city council will be discussing the draft citywide strategic plan. The meeting will be held in the Pickering Room at City Hall Northwest, and that's tomorrow. On April 23rd, Council Committee of the Whole will be meeting at 6:30 p.m. discussing the draft citywide strategic plan, and the COW will be held in council chambers. Thank you. On May 6th, at the regular council meeting will be held here in chambers at 7 p.m. And the potential agenda items are affordable housing proclamation and citywide strategic plan so far. That is all we have. There will be no executive session at the end of our meeting, and so we are adjourned at 9:35.